Hello and welcome. In this video, I will be creating a board and the cards that go along with the game Helionox. It is a soon-to-be Kickstarter and presently a print-and-play game on BoardGameGeek. The first thing I'm going to do is grab a file for the board itself. Unfortunately, there are no PDF files posted for it, so we're going to have to use a program called Posterizer to make our own board. I'll enlarge it to the 5400 by 5400 version. The reason I'm doing that is because when I print out a physical copy, I want the highest quality I can possibly get. So I'm going to save this image to the desktop. And I'm going to use that particular file along with Posterizer to make a PDF version of it across multiple pages. Posterizer. The program is free and readily available online. Do a Google search, you'll be able to locate it, no problem. Once I put my picture in, I'm going to click the next button. You have the option to select whatever size paper you prefer to use. I like Southwest linen paper for my boards and cards. That only comes in letters, so I'm selecting that. You also have the option to select alternate layout, portrait or landscape, and that affects how the image will tile as you create your poster. For this particular application, because it is a square essentially, I'm going to pick a portrait. Here, it's set up. Apparently I have 0.05 of an inch overlap. You can increase that overlap if you like. I'll throw that on there so you can sort of see the difference. This would be 1/10 of an inch. I prefer to stick with as small of an overlap as possible because I want the bulk of the paper to actually be taken up by the image itself. This small amount is going to end up getting trimmed off since it's overlap. So I'm going with that, and I can see my layout. The way that this works is you can either select an absolute size. I want it to be exactly 12 inches tall and 12 inches wide. You can also do a percentage compared to the original picture. I want to do it at 100%. You can see there are many pages that would be used up to do that. It would be a very large board. I prefer the size in pages mode, and in this case I'm going to decrease it down. I think that my best bet is to tile it the height. I actually want to go with a width of 2. So in this case, I've got a width of 2 and then the height is a little bit less than that. You can align the image in whatever way you prefer. The middle boxes are going to center it mid. The side boxes, top and bottom alignment, and this is a left and right alignment, but because I have selected a width of exactly 2 sheets, the left and right alignment do not affect it. I did some kind of rough eyeball calculations on this and thinking that for me, I've chosen letter paper, which is about 8.5 wide per sheet. If I think about the cards as being standard size, that means that this rectangle length would be about 3.5. If I split this in half, it gives me 4 on either side, give or take, which means that this is going to end up to be about 3.5, give or take a little bit. And I think it'll work out for the purposes of the cards themselves. So I'm happy with my width of 2 and my height of just over 1.5. I'm going to click the next button, and it's going to ask me if I would like to save the poster and launch the PDF that is associated with the saved file. So I am going to do that, and I'm going to save it as Helionox, and I'm going to go 4 since it is 4 panels. I'll go ahead and save that on the desktop as well. And because I clicked the checkbox that says to launch the PDF application, it automatically launches for me. So here I can see I've got all of the pieces that I need, all 4, and they are ready to print out. In the next segment, I'm going to talk about spraying the boards so that they are robust to fingerprints and the light spill here and there, as well as attaching it to mat board. So one of the things that I do to make my cards a little bit more high quality than in rough builds is I will print on two different kinds of paper. So here I've got the fronts, some of the fronts and some of the backs for Helionox, and on whatever I qualify to be the front page, I'll use 65-pound linen cardstock paper. Kind of has a nice heavyweight feeling to it. And then the backs, I use a significantly lower poundage of paper. I think it turns out that they're either 20 or 24. I'll be sure to include that in the actual listing. So on their own, this is far too thin for cards, and even the 65-pound, while it's thick, it's just not thick enough to give a really weighty feel to it. But when they're combined together, in addition to the glue, it gives a really nice heavyweight card that genuinely feels like it will stand up to the test of time. In particular, I use Super 77 spray glue because I do want them to last, and I seal them up, so I'll do that in the next part of the video. Okay, so at this point, I've laid out on the left-hand side the board pieces in no particular order. I have a variety of the chit sheets as well as some of the cards, but not all, from one of the files on Board Game Geek. Now at this point, I have shaken the heck out of the spray that I'm using. It's Mod Podge Clear Acrylic Sealer. I, in particular, like the look of the mat for my cards. And I'm going to go through round 1 of spraying. Generally, I'll go from between 2 and 4 layers of spray, allowing approximately 20 to 25 minutes in between each layer. So there's no need to be worried about spraying itself. I kind of, in general, think that the more spray, the better. It really doesn't impact sheets as long as you stay relatively far removed from the paper in terms of distance and keep the can moving. So this is what it looks like. As you're going through, it's a good idea to shake it up in between each segment that you spray. I also tend to go in 2 different directions, beginning up and down, then going left to right, or vice versa, and that kind of gives me a little bit more coverage on the pages. As you're going through, you do want to look out for, when you move the can down the sheet, when you turn back around, the area that you're turning around is getting over spray. So you kind of might want to work on being off of the page itself so that the spray doesn't pool at the bottom or at the sides. Another thing I do by the time I've got down to the end of it, and it's been about 3 minutes by the clock. The left-hand side where I started is going to start to get just tacky, not dry, but tackier. And then I kind of like to go over the whole set one more time. And I do that at a diagonal angle, again, for the idea of getting better coverage along the sheets. So that's layer one, about 5 minutes. I'm gonna let it sit for 15, 20, 25 minutes, depending upon how patient I am, and then I'll come back and do spray 2. All right, so I have completed the first layer of spray, and I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what it looks like as you complete each layer. So this sheet is unsprayed, and it really doesn't have any kind of a sheen to it. If I get just the right angle, you can kind of see the linen, but no sheen. This is one of the board sheets, and you can see when the light hits it, just so, that it's starting to pick up a really nice sheen. So as I build up layers and get complete coverage over them, more and more of the sheets will have that sheen to it. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do my next couple of layers of spray, and I'll do a comparison afterwards. Okay, so at this point, I've sprayed each of the 4 pieces that are going to make up the quad fold board. It is time for me to trim off the excess material for where the boards are going to come together and get it down to either a white border or downright to the edge. Now I think at this stage I'm probably going to connect this to black matte board, so I'm probably going to leave a little bit of the white around the exterior of the 4 pages. The materials that I use to make the boards in terms of cutting, I have a We Are Memory Keepers magnetic cutting mat. You can see that it is well loved. They last for quite a while, but eventually they start to bubble up. This one is getting towards the end of its life expectancy. I really like the magnetic board because, as you can see, the ruler actually sticks to it, so I get far less slide when I am using the rotary cutter. So at this point, I'm gonna lay out my first piece, and I'm gonna trim off the excess. I'm kind of working around the camera as well, so I'm not sure you're going to be able to see everything that I'm doing. Hopefully I won't bump the camera. When I printed out the sheets, I left a very small amount of overlap in between the 2 sheets, so I'm going to have to check that out as I think about combining them. Another thing that I like to do, depending on what I'm cutting, I've got these extra little magnets, so if I'm cutting a piece that could slide off, I just attach a little magnet to it. So I really prefer the rotary cutter for all of my trimming. especially in combination with the magnetic ruler. I think for me, I've had a lot of practice with it, so I just tend to know exactly how hard I need to push down, and I can use the ruler as a guide pushing up against it. X-Acto knives, I am not very proficient with them at all. I'll use them for small things, but when I'm trimming long lengths, I really like to use the rotary cutter. Not that I can use the rotary cutter with 0 damage to myself. I got my pointer finger earlier in the week. It's just recently healed. I know I shaved off probably about 2 or 3 layers of skin, and it was a bit of a mess. So if you do decide to use a rotary cutter, be very careful. Alright, so that's my first piece. And it's going to line up to the bit that has Helionox on it. I mentioned I printed out with overlap, so I'm just going to double check this and see that it lines up okay. Yeah, and actually this looks really just fine, only removing the white portion of it, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to line up the colored portions here to get my border to match. I'll use the previous cut as a guide. And again, the magnetic ruler is particularly good for that. I knew this was not going to slide. It was sort of held in place with the ruler itself. So I've got that trimmed out, and now I'll move on to the bottom half of the board. I decided to match up the excess white portion to the top. And I will frequently do that because I don't want to have to do any measuring. You certainly can measure. I prefer to sort of just eyeball it. I'm doing the same thing here. This is the edge that will not be trimmed, and I'm eyeballing that bottom. I find the more you do this, the more I do this, the easier it is to get those measurements to look pretty darn good. Alright, so I'll get rid of the overlap. That bit's going to connect to the top. Take a look at how I trimmed that bottom bit. Yep, so I've got that lined up. The images look really well lined up, and you can see just eyeballing it again, the more experience I collect, the better that turns out. So that actually is pretty well lined up there. I don't have to retrim it. So at this point, I've got my 4 pieces trimmed out, and I have to worry about connecting it together and attaching it to the mat board. I have the black mat board. This is 12 by 12. Unfortunately, the pieces for my board are too big to get any more than 1 piece of backing out of each sheet, so I've got 4 pieces of mat board, and I'll cut I'll tape them together and then I'll cut for each one of the individual pieces. The tape that I like to use is called Black Bookbinder's tape. It has a nice linen fabric feel to it. I have found it to be very robust. I haven't noticed any peeling on any of the boards that I've put together. So I'm gonna slide my sheets out of the way, and I know that I am going to tape it so that it comes together, folding like a book for the top 2 sheets, and then I'll worry about those bottom 2 sheets when I get there. I always check out the mat board. Usually one edge is kind of rough. You'll notice little pieces coming off of it. So I tend to put that to the outside. This is pretty standard stuff. I'm really just gonna run the tape across and then trim off any excess. First I'll line up the boards, paying particular attention to the middle where all 4 of the boards are gonna come together. I'm gonna move this guy out of the way. Get my tape. I pull it out longer than the boards to start with, and then I know that I'm going to trim it. When I hit it as close to the middle as possible. I have certainly misaligned this tape before. I don't know if you can see the little ripple. It looks like you can. So it looks like in this particular instance, I did a halfway decent job. Just a rough cut on the bottom there. Pull that back. Just a rough cut using the rotary trimmer. All right, now I'm going to flip it over. The cool thing about the rotary trimmer is if you take your time, because this has a nice thick edge to it, the rotary trimmer doesn't necessarily need anything other than to follow that edge. So you just nice and slow, peel that off. Maybe save it for later. Might want to hold something together. I am right-handed, so I like to have my edge positioned like this. All right, now I'm remembering that this was my bottom, so I'm going to go ahead and flip it back upside down so I can see my tape. And now I'm thinking about the fact that the board itself is going to be positioned like this, and these 2 pieces are going to fold together like this. Now, when I fold them, I know I cannot put the bottom ones to fold up and in. I want the bottom one to fold back and underneath. So my next piece that I'm going to attach, I'm going to put it at the bottom, and I want it to fold under, not over. I do not want it to fold like that, so that means that the tape has to be attached to the bottom of this particular sheet. Slide these over. And I need tape on the bottom of this. So I'm actually just going to fold this over, and I'm going to flip it. And you know, I should flip this one too, but I've noticed that got to make sure my clean edge, which is this side, is in the middle. I have to. So now I know it'll fold underneath. All right. So that's that. I'm going to come over here a little bit. Make sure you can see this on the camera, and you can. So I am lining this up. And I'm going to put my tape down, and I know this will fold back. I'm going to line up the tape up here. No overlap. Or as little overlap as possible. And I am going making sure the boards are stuck together. And I have gone past where the boards end. Trim that. All right. Make that stretch out a little bit repress that down. Flip it. And trim. Okay, and again, I'm just using the thickness of the mat board to trim those pieces out. All right, so I've got the top two that fold over and this side that's folding under. The last of the four also has to fold under to match this one. I just have to follow the tape that I laid out already. It's going to go on the opposite side. Okay. Naturally, you can trim it before you put it together. I just find that I tend to make less mistakes if I trim it afterwards. All right, so I've got that lined up. Use my tape. Go a little bit further than I need to. I really don't want too terribly much overlap on this side, and it looks like I've managed to do no overlap. Make sure that the boards are together. Okay. Trim out that side. Okay, I'm done with my tape for now. And now I do have to trim that last side. So I'm going to have to undo it. Move this guy back. All right. Last piece of tape. All right, so that's the board itself, and now I've got to worry about placing the paper on it. And I think I'm going to do a couple of little finishing touches before I get to the spray glue section. I would really like to finish this off. I think for this particular build, I'm going to round up the corners on both the paper and the board. I think that gives it a nice little finishing touch, and when you bump into the corners or bump the corners into anything, it doesn't scuff them up. So I'm going to grab my corner rounder and I'm going to round some corners. This is the Oregon Laminations 3mm corner rounder. I really like this one. It makes professional cuts every single time. You can't do things that are incredibly thick, but this particular mat board is within what you can corner round. And I'm also going to make sure that I only corner round the four corners, one on each paper. There's a little slot that the paper goes into, and then it makes a really nice corner. Every single time you can count on it. So using that, do that for each one of these. And I'm also going to need to round the corners once I trim this mat board down. They stick very well through the mat board, but it does have a little bit of a grab, so it's worth using. Now, because I have purposively chosen to not trim beforehand, I have a length of mat board that I've got to trim that is far longer than my particular ruler. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start at the edge and I'm gonna cut to the middle where the tape is, peel that away, and then trim the rest of the space. To do that, I'm gonna remove my extra pieces and I'm gonna line up for height where I want that to be. Slide my mat down so that I can get all the way to the edge and go from there. All right, so I'm really at this point only concerned that the bottom of this is lined up. The left and right isn't that big of a deal. I'm only trimming the top for now. I've also gotten myself into a position where I'm on the wrong side of this, so I'm gonna have to kind of spin this around so that I can get it on the right side of me. All right. Naturally, there are certainly far less awkward ways to set these things up and trim and all of that good stuff, but I've picked an incredibly awkward way to do it today. Learn from my idiosyncrasies. Okay, so I'm basically, I'm not measuring, I'm eyeballing. According to the angle of the camera, it looks like I'm going to have far less black here, but that's just the ruler cutting it off. I'm going to essentially get approximately the same amount of black border as there is white border on the image. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that looks pretty good. The mat board, because it is so much thicker than paper, I have to go through it a couple of times. Actually, on the second cut, I had made it all the way through, but I hate moving the ruler unless I know for absolute certain that it has been cut through. And in this case, I'm going to go a little bit past my tape line. So that's that. And that came off nice and clean. I'm actually going to go ahead and untape that. You can see that it pulled a layer right off the mat board, so it's pretty good tape. Sets up fast. Throw that over there. All right, next little bit. Grab and do this other side. Make my board slightly less unwieldy. Okay, that's that part, and I think I saved the right part over here. Yep, that's the one. So I'm going to line that up on the bottom, and left and right, again, does not matter so much at this point. Because I went further past, I've already got a starting line for where I'm going to begin my cut. I'm going to line that up. Same thing with the bit that's already cut off. And I'm going to make sure that it looks pretty evenly spaced, so that looks pretty good. Okay, I can feel that that has released, but of course it hasn't released entirely. I've got the end here that I did not trim all the way through, so that one's good. Okay, so I've got the top bits done. I'm going to do the bottom bits next. Next I have to do the sides. So I'll grab these guys. My ruler is going to make the whole length on that one, so that makes my job a little bit less challenging. I'm lining up the two pieces of paper, one of them on the edge and definitely the border with the upper bit. Doing that because it doesn't really matter if the black border is not 100% uniform all the way around, but it does matter that the white contrast border lines up. So if I have to slide these pages a little bit further down or up as they're laid out now, that's really immaterial. I'm going to line up according to the center when I do the spray gluing, but to make the border itself, a little bit of error in cutting is okay. That's cut. So at this point, I'll just kind of take a look and see if my trim job looks halfway decent. Yeah, so that looks pretty good all the way around. And because I rounded the edges, I want to make sure that I round the edges of the black. Like I said, the Oregon Laminations 3mm trimmer can, I sound like a commercial, I'm sure, but it can handle the thickness of this matte board, so it's not a problem. It'll chew right through, and then you have a nice rounded corner. These are the small things that finish off a project and really make it look that much better. I actually find that in the absence of tools, you can do a really nice job building these things. The extra tools just finalize projects and they give it that extra little touch. Okay, one more. All right, so there's that. The last little bit that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned is, believe me, you always want to tape together your board before you go spraying. It has been the case on, sad to say, but more than one occasion. I've managed to glue these pages down without really thinking about it, and then I could not make a nice folding board. If I didn't have this tape on the top and the two on the bottom, the quad board would not fold appropriately. So make sure that you take the time to tape up your board before you go spraying. So in the next video, next section of this video, I think I'm going to edit it all together. I'm going to go ahead and do my spray glue and attach it directly to the board. I am now at the stage where I am ready to spray glue my board sheets to the matte board I put together earlier. What you're seeing in front of you now is a well-used piece of butcher block paper. I bought the roll, and as it gets more and more use out of it, once that spray glue has built up on it, I just roll it out and clip it up. The particular spray glue that I make use of is Scotch Super 77. I have been using this for more than a decade actually, and the pieces of paper that I have varying spray glued to different materials are still attached. So if you want something that is going to last for a very long time, I recommend Super 77. For me, if I'm going to make it, I want to use the best materials that I can. Some people see it as overkill, but it's up to you what kind you want to use. Super 77 is for me. So what I've got laid out then is I have the spot for the spraying to take place, and in addition to that, off to the side, I've got my matte board set up. So this is the way it was set up in the previous room. It's going to fold this like a book, and then the bottoms are going to fold under. I have that set up specifically so that I can lay out the sheets and not get confused partway through. The same thing, I'm gonna lay out my sheets so that as I flip them, I know where they belong. These two sheets go together at the top, and these two sheets go together at the bottom. So I'm gonna flip them exactly like that, so that as I transfer them to the mat board, I don't put the wrong sheet in the wrong place. I probably had this section of butcher block paper down for the better part of, well, I should count my games. I've done dozens of sprays, and this is still holding up okay. It's getting a little bit tacky overall. There's a little bit of buildup on it, so probably in the next month I'll change that sheet. All right, so I'm just shaking up my Super 77, and I am not afraid of overspray because I've got my butcher block down, and I use a little Goo Gone in the back if it goes too far. So I'm going to make sure that I have each piece well covered in the spray glue. I also have to make sure that it can spray. There we go. Clearly, if you're going to use spray glue, you want to have some sort of station set up. This glue dust really does spread out. It's all over this paper, and it's going to be very tacky on my fingers as well. I mentioned Goo Gone earlier. To clean up the surface, Goo Gone is actually really good to clean it off of your fingertips as well. So I have laid this out exactly as it's supposed to go over on the side. So I'm going to move the camera over, and I'm going to do my placements. All right. I've picked this one up, but I want to start at the bottom because I've got a really clear edge. The tape up top doesn't really let me see the edge particularly well. All right, so I'm going edge to edge here, and I'm going to keep it as aligned as I possibly can. When you lay it down, it has a little bit of give to it if you don't lay it down completely flat, and I use that to kind of push it up to the edge. All right, so I've got the bottom one laid out, and now I can use that to lay out the top one. One thing that I want to mention is because the two top pieces are going to be coming together, you really don't want to butt the edge of that paper directly up against the piece of paper that's on the opposite side. You want to leave just a smidgen of room for them so that they don't kind of crush each other. So I'm going to slide that. Double check, and it does look like I've got a little bit of room in between those two. Okay, I'm going to get you guys a little bit closer so you can see in between the two pieces I've left just a little slice of room, and that's so that when the board folds, the two pieces of paper don't push up against each other like tectonic plates and crush each other. Down at the bottom, the two pieces that have been joined kind of naturally have a little separation, and so I don't have to worry so much about that. And I know that I don't have to worry about the mids crushing each other because they're going to fold under. So put you back on the... That is the end of the board making. I can fold it up. And it's